They said silence was the palace's oldest tradition, but on that cold afternoon it felt more like a trap. King Charles sat hunched at his mother's old writing desk, the same one she had used for decades, the air thick with the scent of paper and age. A cracked wax seal lay on the wood, red fragments scattered like dried blood. In his hand, a letter. Not an official document, not even marked, but written in Queen Elizabeth's unmistakable handwriting. A letter that could tear apart everything. Charles read it again, each word more haunting than the last. It wasn't grief that hit him, it was dread. His mother's warning wasn't vague. She had named betrayal, accused someone inside the family of manipulating public opinion. A breach of the one principle the monarchy was never supposed to violate, political neutrality. And there, half scratched out in red ink, two words that refused to fade from his memory: Camilla. Exploiting power. He didn't want to believe it. Camilla, his wife, had been at his side through scandal, pain, and ridicule. But the more he stared at the letter, the more it twisted in his hands like a curse. He knew what this was. Not just a revelation, it was a choice. Still reeling, he locked the letter in his private safe and tried to return to normal, but nothing was normal anymore. The palace felt different. A servant's glance lingered a second too long. Footsteps echoed in the corridors when no one was there. Doors he remembered shutting appeared slightly ajar. Something was off. Then there was Margaret. She wasn't just any maid. She'd served the palace for over 2 decades. Quiet, reliable, always in the background. But lately, she was everywhere. Polishing corners that didn't need cleaning, rearranging books he hadn't touched, and then one day, as she passed him in the hallway, she slipped something into his palm. A folded scrap of paper with 5 chilling words. You must trust no one. The note sent shivers down his spine. At night, Charles lay in bed beside Camilla, staring at the ceiling, pretending to sleep. Her breathing was soft, steady, but her presence felt different now. He kept replaying the words of the letter, Margaret's note, the shifting shadows in the palace. He had to know the truth. Days later, seeking clarity, he walked the private gardens behind Buckingham, a place few ventured. That's when he saw her. Camilla, speaking with a man he didn't recognize at first, until the man turned, revealing his face. Edward Thompson, a journalist infamous for leaking royal secrets. Charles ducked behind the hedges, barely breathing. He didn't catch everything, but her tone was sharp, measured, confident. We must manage the media, she said. Make sure they see the right story, not about a charity, not about tradition. It was about control. When she returned to the palace and greeted him with her usual warmth, he forced a smile. Who was that man? Edward Thompson, she said easily. He's writing about a charity I'm supporting. I thought I'd help. Charles said nothing, but inside something cracked. That night, dinner was tense. The long table between them felt like an ocean. He tested the waters with a simple question. Do you believe political neutrality still matters, Camilla? She raised an eyebrow. Of course. Why? He shrugged. Just thinking of my mother. She smiled, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. You're overthinking again, Charles. He didn't respond because he already knew. Something was unraveling beneath them, and the Queen's letter was only the beginning. The real war hadn't started yet, but it was coming, and it would begin with the people closest to him. The rain started just before dawn, tapping gently against the tall windows of Charles's study. He sat still in the velvet armchair, wrapped in a silence so heavy it felt like armor. He hadn't slept. Margaret was gone. One of the guards had mentioned she'd resigned for family reasons, but Charles knew that was a lie. Margaret wouldn't leave without saying goodbye, not without a word, not after what she'd warned him. The timing was too perfect, too clean. He searched for her in the staff records. Her name had been wiped from the schedule. Her chambers were empty, linen stripped, personal items gone, as if she'd never existed. But a note was left tucked into a crease of his calendar. Just one word: truth. His grip tightened. Someone was trying to erase the evidence. Margaret had become a liability, and Charles was next. He needed help, but there was no one he trusted. Not the guards, not the advisors who shuffled through the halls offering hollow smiles, but there was one name that hadn't left his mind: Lord Harrington. He was old school, quiet, almost invisible, served his mother faithfully, never courted the press, never chased attention. Just a man with eyes like polished steel and a memory that saw everything. Charles summoned him that morning, behind locked doors. When Harrington entered, Charles wasted no time. "I found a letter from my mother." The old man didn't flinch. He only nodded once, slow and deliberate. "She accused someone in the family of violating political neutrality. She said they were manipulating public opinion." Charles hesitated. "She might have meant Camilla." Harrington said nothing. His silence stretched long enough for Charles to question whether he was listening. Then the advisor leaned forward slightly. "Did your mother mention names?" he asked. "No," Charles lied. Harrington studied him. His gaze was like an X-ray. "You are the king," he said, "but you're still a son, and sons struggle to see their mothers as fallible." "She wasn't wrong. Then you know what must be done." Charles pulled open the drawer, retrieving the letter and laying it gently on the desk. Harrington read it, hand steady, expression unreadable. When he finished, he returned it to the desk and looked Charles directly in the eye. "This letter is genuine. The handwriting, the tone, it is hers." "So it's real," Charles said, half whispering. "Yes." Charles sank back, breath shallow. "Then what do I do?" "That depends," Harrington said, standing, "on whether you wish to protect the crown or protect your heart." The door closed softly behind him. That evening, Charles found himself alone again. Camilla had gone to a charity gala, an event he hadn't been invited to, or maybe deliberately excluded from. The staff said she left with Edward Thompson. Back in the study, Charles approached the safe. He opened it to check the letter, making sure it hadn't been touched. But something else caught his eye. A box of medals had been moved. A file of financial reports was now slightly out of place. Someone had been here. Someone had opened his safe. His pulse quickened. He reached for the letter. Still there. Oh, but had it been read, photographed, copied? He couldn't be sure. Just as he shut the safe, he heard a creak behind him. Camilla stood at the door. No makeup, no jewelry, just a silk robe and bare feet. "You don't trust me anymore," she said. He didn't answer. She walked closer. "You've been looking into things. I can feel it." Still, he said nothing. Camilla's voice softened. "Charles? If you keep digging, you won't like what you find." She left without another word, and Charles stood there, heart pounding, surrounded by walls that felt like they were closing in. The yellow envelope arrived without a stamp, without a seal, just slid under Charles's study door, like a whisper in the dark. He picked it up with trembling fingers. No markings, no signature, just one word scrawled on the front. Truth. Inside a single sheet. A transfer contract bearing Margaret's name, assigning her to a remote charity on the outskirts of London. The charity was barely operational, just a shell tied to a media group known for covering royal gossip and leaks. The implications were clear. Margaret hadn't resigned, she'd been pushed out. Relocated, silenced. Charles stared at the paper for a long time, everything inside him tightening into a knot. Camilla's handprints were all over this, elegant and invisible. And Margaret had known too much. She'd tried to warn him, and now she was gone. Not dead, but exiled, disarmed in a war she never asked to fight. Charles wasn't angry anymore. He was cold, focused. He went back to the letter, his mother's letter, and studied it again, turning it over in his hands. The ink was faint in places, but something about the edges felt wrong. Almost too thin. He ran a finger along the inner fold and felt it, a hidden seam. Carefully, he peeled it open. Inside was a second sheet, so thin it could have been mistaken for parchment. It was a codicil. A handwritten amendment to the Queen's will, dated, signed, and utterly damning. The woman who violates political neutrality shall never be crowned. No name, no direct accusation, but Charles didn't need it. The timing, the manipulation, the quiet coordination with the press, Camilla's meetings with Edward Thompson, it all snapped into place. His mother had known, and she'd tried to stop it from the grave. He placed the documents on his desk side by side. The original letter, the codicil, the contract. Then, from the inner drawer, he retrieved his last piece, an audio recorder. Harrington had given him just hours earlier. Camilla's voice filled the room. "Anyone who threatens me must be removed." We must shape public opinion, ensure they see me as a worthy queen. Charles felt sick, not from the words, but from the realization that everything had already been shaped. The interviews, the media pieces praising Camilla's grace, her strength, her charm. It had been a performance, and he had played the supporting role. The council chamber was full the next day. No formal wear, no press, just the most powerful figures in the royal family and government. Camilla entered last, poised as ever, but her eyes darted to the desk. She saw the recorder, the papers, the truth laid bare. Charles stood at the head of the table. "My mother left behind more than memories," he said, voice even. "She left a warning, and I ignored it until now." He motioned to Lord Harrington. The old man stood and gave a brief, quiet confirmation. The handwriting was genuine. The codicil was legal. The voice recording was verified. Camilla rose, her face pale. "Charles, don't do this." "You already did," he said. He didn't strip her of her title. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand apologies. Instead, he issued one decree. From this day forward, Queen Camilla shall no longer act in any public or political capacity. She will retain her title in name only. This decision is fine. She said nothing, just sat down slowly, her crown intact but her power gone. And as Charles left the chamber, the silence returned, but this time it wasn't a trap, it was peace.